All right. So I mentioned the anthropic principle in my last video. And so basically, there's something before that, right? So we live in a universe, right? So in a materialistic system, we assume that it's a closed universe. So according to science, it's like we only have the power of observation, which this universe allows us, right? And there is an unlikeliness to the existence of life. And that's the first problem, right? Is like, well, what is the origin of life? And, as far as science is concerned, you take it back and back and you get to like proteins. So their answer is like, well, the unlikeliness of life coming about is essentially, how likely is this compound to just randomly form, you know. And so it's measuring like, well, like what are necessary, what things are necessary for that to come about, and something like Earth, right, where temperature is right, you get the water, you get them moving, you get all these elements in the right place, and the soup forms, and then you get proteins out of it, and the proteins just construct life. And there's a huge gap there between what we know and the hypothesis of how that would even take place because it can't be observed, right? They can't replicate this, which is an important point. And that's where we kind of were, as a Christian community at least, in regards to atheism, like, well, see, it's very unlikely for life to exist. But there's always that chance, right, that science can appeal to is that, well, like it might have happened naturally, let's say, just on its own. And so that's what we're going with. Um, but then you get to the anthropic principle, which is like, well, okay, so if life is really, really, really rare, right? It's like very improbable, but like there's this chance, and it's like if sentient life exists only once in the universe, then we would be it, right? Because we're the ones thinking about it, observing it. Um, but it might exist many, many times throughout the universe, and they're like, well, see, there are many planets that have the right things for this to come about, and there might be others, and fair enough. Okay. And so it boils down to these probabilities of these natural things occurring. It is infinitely unlikely for the universe which we inhabit to exist. And so you haven't really gotten anywhere with your estimation of the likelihood of these proteins forming or whatever. And so what that means is, like I said, there's this in the last video, there's this narrow band of forces, let's say. So like just take gravity, for example. It's like gravity has to be this strong in order for life to exist, because if it was too strong, it couldn't. If it was too weak, it couldn't, because the planets wouldn't form and all this or that, whatever. Every natural law and phenomenon has a band in which it could potentially support life, and some of those are like incredibly narrow. Like so in the previous argument, it's like, well, the Earth is like precisely where it needs to be in relation to the sun, and in order to support life. Strong and weak force of um, atoms and like these particles, and even like subatomic particles, and like all of these forces which we observe have to be within this like exact place for life to exist, which is there you're actually talking about the universe. So what I like to say is the universe, obviously, without question, it's not up for debate. The universe has a propensity to create life. And you think, well, from a naturalistic perspective, that's absurd because life, it is totally arbitrary as something to exist, right? If there's no spirit, no God, or anything like that, why doesn't a universe exist in which no life exists if life is meaningless? Because those universes are infinitely more likely to exist, right? And so the only answer to that is the multiverse, an argument that exists whose sole purpose is to prevent another conclusion from being made. That hypothesis is suspect, right? If you're saying, because the multiverse is the only theory or a hypothesis when arriving at this knowledge that, the universe itself is finely tuned to for life to exist, the only thing that prevents the next step to be a search for the creator, inward and outward, is the multiverse. Is to say, well, even though it's infinitely unlikely for a universe which supports life, let alone has the propensity to create life and has created life, um, even though it's very unlikely, it's like, well, there are infinite universes which exist. Therefore, you know, for every universe like ours, there's like an infinite number of other universes. But as I said in my previous video, that doesn't get you anywhere because there are an infinite number of universes which also don't support life. So, like, for every universe that gets up to the point where even like a protein could form, there are an infinite number of entire universes in which that is not even possible. And even back of that, even if you say, okay, given, it's like, whatever, sure, there's an infinite number of universes. Anything that is conceivably possible has happened somewhere in some universe. It's like, you still have a multiverse as a set of things which has a propensity to create life, which is totally arbitrary and meaningless in your worldview. So you still haven't gotten anywhere. So, like, stop talking about this silly thing. It's fun. It's like a fun thing to think about, in your hero stories, in your Marvel, DC universes, it's like, oh, there's another world where this happened or whatever. It's like great fun. Okay, but it's stupid. Like it's a dumb idea to uh not to suggest necessarily, but to say that it's like, well, it's got to be this way because the only other answer is that God exists. It's just silly, and that's that. So again, if you really think about it, the fact that life exists implies that God exists 100%. Unquestionably, that's that. So once you arrive at the understanding that there is a supernatural world, and those terms can really bog down the thought process because they have a lot of implications that we had, it's like haven't gotten there yet. you know, let's just say metaphysical, like there's something that we can't observe, that's caused this to be this way because it is this way. And for something to be set in motion, there has to be a force there. So, so that takes you to like deism, right? But if we can get to God at least, and I believe that itself has for any reasonable person, there most atheist types will reject that out of hand, but they just won't have a reason to. Uh, but so once we get to God, I think it's very easy to get to Christianity. Um, it's like a few steps. It's really easy. So that's that, and we can talk about that at a later time.